My dad looked me straight in the eye, jaw clenched, voice low and cold. "You're a disgrace to this family." I felt my stomach drop, my heart crack right in two. But instead of breaking, I reached into my bag, and when I pulled it out, his face went pale. He never expected that. My name is Haley, and if there's one thing I learned early in life, it's how to disappear while standing right in front of people. Not because I wanted to, but because it became clear that my presence didn't matter the way it should have. From as far back as I can remember, our family orbit revolved around two stars, and I was neither of them. My older brother, Kyle, was the unstoppable force in Dad's eyes. Quarterback by sophomore year, straight A's without even trying, a future already paved in trophies and handshakes. His room was a shrine to his potential, walls covered in medals, newspaper clippings, college letters. Dad would beam when Kyle walked into a room, puff up like he'd raised a warrior. And maybe he had. For him. Then there was Sarah, my baby sister. Blonde curls, big doe eyes, and a smile that could melt glaciers. She didn't even have to ask for things. Dad was already at the store, buying whatever toy or treat she hadn't even realized she wanted yet. "That's my little girl," he'd say, ruffling her hair with the softness I never got to see. Mom would just nod with this faraway look, like she'd accepted the roles carved out for us long ago. And me? I was there. I wasn't exceptional at anything. I didn't have a talent that made people lean in. I got decent grades, I loved to draw, and I read constantly, but none of that counted in our house. My sketchbooks were tucked away in drawers. My voice, when it dared to speak, often got drowned out by Dad's football recaps or Sarah's whining about her glitter pen running out. The only time people really noticed me was when I cried. And even then, it wasn't the kind of attention you'd want. "There she goes again," Dad would grunt, shaking his head like I'd spilled something on the carpet. "You're too sensitive, Haley. The world isn't going to baby you." I was 7 the first time he said that. I had scraped my knee on the driveway while riding my bike. Blood dripped down my shin, mixing with dirt, but what hurt more was the way he looked at me when I came limping over, more annoyed than concerned. "Toughen up," he muttered, not even getting up from his chair. I remember blinking back tears, nodding like I understood, like I agreed. I stopped crying that day. On the outside, anyway. As the years passed, that phrase became his mantra. Toughen up. Stop being dramatic. Why do you always make everything about you? I learned to bury my feelings deep, so deep, I sometimes wondered if they were even real. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I stayed quiet when I wanted to explode. I clapped for Kyle's football wins and sat through Sarah's dance recitals, clenching my fists when Dad would leap to his feet, shouting, "That's my girl," while I sat 2 rows behind, invisible. He didn't notice my report card when I made the honor roll. Didn't come to the art exhibit where my sketch had won a state prize. He didn't even know I'd joined the school paper or that I'd gotten published in a national teen magazine. If it wasn't on a field or a stage or announced with applause, it didn't exist. But I did. I existed. And every day, that truth dug at me like a splinter under the skin. I started staying up late, not because I had work to do, but because I didn't want to face another dinner where Kyle's latest game or Sarah's tantrum stole the spotlight. I'd eat quickly and excuse myself, hiding away in my room where I could breathe in the silence. My room, small, tucked in the back of the hallway, was my safe haven. The one place no one barged into uninvited. I'd sit on my bed, knees to chest, sketching the things I wished I could say out loud. Sometimes I'd imagine myself as a character in one of my stories, strong, fierce, unshakable. Someone who didn't flinch when their dad raised his voice. Someone who didn't wilt when ignored. Someone who didn't care, even though I did care. More than I wanted to. I used to lie in bed and ask myself what was wrong with me. Why I couldn't just be like Kyle or Sarah. Why it seemed so easy for them to be lovable. I remember one night, after a particularly awful argument where Dad told me I was too much, I stared at the ceiling and whispered, maybe if I were less, maybe then you'd see me. But I couldn't be less. I couldn't turn off the way things hurt. I felt everything. And Dad made me believe that was a flaw. It wasn't just the words either. It was his silence. His absence. The way he could walk past me in the hallway without a glance, or how he always seemed to remember what Kyle liked on his burgers but forgot I was vegetarian, for 2 years. Mom would sometimes catch the look in my eyes, and she'd hesitate like she wanted to say something. But she never did. She just sighed, patted my hand, and went back to stirring the soup. Like sympathy without action was enough. But I wasn't weak. I was tired. There's a difference. Tired of walking on eggshells. Tired of rehearsing conversations in my head I knew would never happen. Tired of hoping that maybe this time, he'd say I'm proud of you, and mean it. I didn't need perfection. I just needed acknowledgement. To be seen. And the thing that haunted me the most? I didn't even think he hated me. Hate would have meant he felt something. What he gave me was nothing. Indifference. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question your worth. Still, I kept showing up. 4 birthdays. 4 dinners. For family photos where I was always stuck on the edge of the frame, half cropped, half smiling. Because some desperate part of me believed if I tried just a little harder, maybe something would shift. But it didn't. Not after my first heartbreak. Not after I got accepted into college. Not after I started winning awards that even made other parents proud. Every win of mine was met with a shrug, or worse, a passive-aggressive jab. Oh, you're still doing that little art thing? Or, I guess college hands out degrees to anyone these days. And every time he said something like that, I would just nod. Smile. Swallow it. I told myself it was fine. That I didn't need his approval. That I was above it. But I was lying. There was still this little girl inside me, bloody-kneed, shaking, trying not to cry, who wanted her dad to kneel beside her and say, "It's okay. You're strong. I see you." He never did. And then, one moment changed everything. It was a regular Sunday afternoon, the kind where the smell of burnt bacon lingered and football played too loud in the background. Sarah was whining about her dance costume, Kyle was bragging about a job offer, and I was sitting at the edge of the kitchen table, half listening, trying to breathe through the noise. That's when Dad turned to me and said it. Out of nowhere. No context. No build-up. You're a disappointment, Haley. My fork slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the plate. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But the look in his eyes told me I hadn't. He meant it. Those 5 words, quiet, cold, careless, landed like a punch to the gut. The room didn't even go quiet. That's the worst part. Everyone just kept going. Like it was normal. But I stopped. Everything in me stopped. And in that stillness, I realized something. I couldn't shrink myself any more than I already had. I had nothing left to tuck away. I had given him everything, and he still couldn't see me. So I made a decision. I wouldn't fight for a seat at his table anymore. I'd build my own. And he was going to wish he had paid attention, because what came next would bring him to his knees. The final straw didn't come with a scream. It didn't come with a slammed door or a broken plate or one of those movie-style meltdowns where the whole house goes silent. It came quietly, cutting sharper than any scream could. It was my college graduation day. The sun was bright but not warm, and the air felt tense, as if it knew something I didn't. I stood outside the auditorium, cap crooked from the hugs I'd already received, diploma folder pressed tightly against my chest like a lifeline. I should have been elated. I was summa cum laude. The first in my family to earn a degree. I had studied through migraines, skipped parties to finish papers, juggled 2 jobs just to stay afloat. And still, I had made it to the finish line, barely, but I made it. I had imagined this moment for years. In the version that played over and over in my mind, I walked out of that building, tassel swinging, and Dad was there, arms wide, eyes glassy with pride, saying something like, "That's my girl." I imagined him finally looking at me the way he looked at Kyle after a game-winning touchdown or Sarah after a solo recital, like I was seen. Like I mattered. But that's not what happened. I spotted him by the trees, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding his eyes. Mom was beside him, smiling with this forced brightness that barely hid her exhaustion. Kyle was scrolling on his phone. Sarah was already complaining about the heat. Still, I smiled and jogged toward them, my diploma folder clutched in my hand. I did it! I beamed, holding it up like it was a trophy. I had no idea that pride could turn so quickly into pain. Dad didn't reach for the folder. He didn't even step forward. He just tilted his head slightly, and I could see his lips curve, not into a smile, but into a smirk. "Well," he said, voice dry as gravel, "guess a useless liberal arts degree counts for something these days." The words hit me like ice water to the face. Cold. Dismissive. Effortless. Like all the blood, sweat, and years I'd poured into this day meant nothing. I blinked, not sure I'd heard him right. But the way Kyle snorted under his breath confirmed I had. The edges of my pride began to fray right there on that campus lawn, while students hugged their beaming parents in every direction around me. "Dad," Mom started gently, trying to place a hand on his arm, but he brushed her off without looking at her. "Don't start," he muttered. "Let's not pretend this is Harvard." Her face flushed red with embarrassment. I saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way she quickly busied herself with adjusting Sarah's sun hat just to avoid meeting my eyes. I stood frozen, diploma still outstretched, arms slowly lowering as my heart did the same. The warmth drained from my cheeks. My throat tightened. I felt like everyone was watching, even though no one probably was. But in that moment, it didn't matter. I was humiliated. Gutted. Not just because of what he said, but because a part of me had still hoped. Even after everything, I still thought he might show up for me in a real way. And that hope, as small as it was, made the fall even harder. We took one picture that day. Just one. I stood between them, fake smile plastered on my face. Dad's arm was loosely around my shoulder, his body angled slightly away from mine. When I looked at the photo later, it looked like I had been photoshopped in. Like I didn't belong there. That night, we had dinner at a mid-tier steakhouse. The kind Dad liked, loud, crowded, with cheap drinks and a lot of meat. We all sat around a table with peeling laminate menus and too many crumbs. The conversation was shallow. Kyle talked about a job interview. Sarah recapped her latest dance rehearsal. Dad laughed at Kyle's joke about business majors actually doing something with their lives. Mom tried to redirect the conversation twice. No one took the bait. I barely touched my plate. The steak I had ordered, medium, came out rare, blood pooling near the potatoes. I kept staring at it, trying not to think about the irony. How something could look done on the outside and still be raw in the middle. Kind of like me. Then, out of nowhere, Dad leaned back in his chair, looked right at me, and said it. "You think you're special, Haley?" he asked, voice just loud enough to cut through the music playing overhead. "You're just a burden we carried until you finally left the house." The fork slipped from my hand and hit the table with a soft clang. Mom gasped. "David." But he wasn't done. "No, really. Let's be honest for once," he said, looking around like he was doing everyone a favor. "All she ever did was mope around, act like the world owed her something. At least now she's someone else's problem." Silence. Deafening silence. The music kept playing. Glasses clinked. A waiter walked by carrying a tray of desserts. But all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. I stared at him, blinking slowly, feeling something inside me crack, not in a dramatic, stormy way, but like the final pop of a worn thread. A quiet snap. The kind you don't notice until the whole thing unravels. I looked down at my lap. My hands were clenched into fists. My nails dug into my palms so hard I knew they'd leave marks. I counted slowly in my head. 1, 2, 3, trying not to cry, not to scream, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. All my life, I had tried. I had tried to be good. To be worthy. To be seen. I had swallowed every insult, brushed off every cold shoulder, told myself it didn't matter. That one day, he'd see what I'd become and feel proud. But now, sitting across from him at that sticky table, I realized the truth. He never would. It didn't matter how hard I worked. How many awards I won. How many times I bit my tongue to keep the peace. He would never see me the way I wanted to be seen. And once I let that sink in, a strange calm washed over me. The kind that follows grief. The kind that follows acceptance. He may never value me. But that didn't mean I had to keep shrinking for him. That was the night something shifted inside me, permanently. The little girl in me, the one who once begged the universe for his approval, finally let go. And in her place stood someone new. Someone who didn't need his validation to feel worthy. Someone who would take all the pain he'd piled on her and turn it into something powerful. Something he couldn't ignore. That was the night I decided, he may never love me the way I deserved, but he was about to respect me, whether he liked it or not. The following week, just days after that dinner that broke something inside me for good, my phone rang. I was sitting at my tiny desk in my off-campus apartment, curled up with a blanket even though it was too warm for one. The place still smelled like leftover takeout and the eucalyptus candle I lit religiously while studying. I was rereading an email about final grades when the screen lit up with an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail. But something in me said answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear while trying not to spill my lukewarm coffee. A woman's voice came through, crisp and professional. "Hi, is this Haley Taylor?" My heart skipped a beat. "Yes. Speaking. This is Lauren from Nextvia Labs. You interned with us last semester, we've been reviewing your work, and I'd love to discuss a full-time opportunity." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Nextvia Labs wasn't just any tech startup. It was the startup. Known for disrupting the market with AI-powered medical diagnostics. They were young, aggressive, and changing the world, and somehow, they wanted me. Lauren continued, "Your code review project really stood out. The CTO was particularly impressed by your solution to the language processing model. He actually mentioned it in last week's board meeting. We'd like to bring you on as a full-time software engineer, starting next month." I blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" She laughed warmly. "I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't. And then came the words that stopped me cold. The starting offer is $110,000 plus benefits, stock options, and relocation if you need it. A sound left me, half laugh, half gasp. I covered my mouth like I had just blurted a secret in church. I couldn't speak for several seconds. That number kept bouncing around in my head. 6 figures. Right out of college. All the late nights. All the cheap coffee. All the moments I felt like I was nothing. It wasn't for nothing. Lauren talked me through the paperwork and onboarding timeline, but I barely absorbed any of it. My mind was too busy spiraling in 100 directions. When the call ended, I sat frozen, phone still in my hand, screen dark. I stared at the reflection of myself, messy hair, oversized sweatshirt, red-rimmed eyes, and thought, he's not going to believe this. But instead of screaming or dancing around my room or calling my mom like I would have once done, I just went quiet. It wasn't that I wasn't excited. I was. But more than that, I was calculating. Because this wasn't just a job. It was a moment. A shift. Proof. Proof that everything he said about me, that I was a burden, that I was wasting my time, that I wasn't cut out for the real world, was wrong. And I wasn't going to waste it with some rushed announcement. No. I wanted to show him. I wanted him to see what he had thrown away. What he had mocked. So I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom, even though I knew she'd cry from happiness. Not Kyle, not Sarah. Not even Sam, my best friend since 8th grade who had seen every high and low of my life. I swallowed it. Tucked it in my chest like a live ember. A secret flame I planned to unleash at the exact right time. Meanwhile, Dad didn't change. If anything, he got worse. The comments became more pointed now that I was just a girl with a pretty diploma and no real future. Every conversation felt like walking barefoot on broken glass. So what now? He said one day over the phone when I called to check in on Mom. Gonna be one of those barista philosophers? I smiled through the receiver. Something like that. Another time, during Sunday dinner, Kyle joked about how Sarah would probably earn more than me before I even paid off my student loans. Dad laughed and raised his beer. Finally, someone said it out loud. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. But I said nothing. Just kept chewing, just kept smiling. Because behind the scenes, I was building something massive. Something they wouldn't see coming until it was already too late to ignore. Every morning, I clocked in at Nexvia remotely. I worked under one of the most respected engineers in the field. I was given real responsibilities, critical systems, complex problems, leadership roles and team huddles. And I didn't just survive. I thrived. My code ran cleaner than most of the senior devs. My team praised me. My team lead told me I was one of the best hires they'd made that year. They didn't care that I was emotional. They didn't care that I was quiet. They cared that I delivered. By month 2, my mentor had nominated me for an internal award for innovation. I hadn't even unpacked all my moving boxes yet. Then, one Thursday afternoon, my inbox dinged. Subject, Innovation and Impact Summit 2025, Keynote Invitation. At first, I thought it was spam. I reread the message 3 times before the weight of it hit me. They weren't just inviting me to attend. They wanted me to speak. A keynote. At a national summit. Broadcast live. Hundreds of industry leaders. Journalists. Investors. Students. Me. They wanted me to tell my story. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding like a drum against my ribs. This was it. The moment. The chance to step into the light after a lifetime of being told I didn't shine. I RSVP'd with shaking hands. I spent the next few weeks preparing, practicing my speech at night, rewriting sections, adding jokes here and there, cutting out others. I told them I wanted to write it myself. They offered me a coach. I declined. This wasn't just a talk. It was a declaration. And the best part? I hadn't told my family a word. Not about the job. Not about the money. Not about the keynote. Nothing. They still thought I was floundering, still scrambling to figure it out. I let them believe that. Let Dad keep his smug smirk whenever he said I was wasting my time. Let Kyle make his offhand comments about how the real world would chew me up. Let Sarah roll her eyes at every mention of Haley's degree. I let them underestimate me. Because I was done explaining. Now. I was about to show. The summit arrived on a cool Saturday morning. I stepped out of the car in a navy blue suit, hair pinned back, heels clicking sharply against the marble entry. The hotel was massive, gold accents, velvet curtains, the kind of place Dad said was for people who throw money away. Backstage, I could barely feel my hands. My palms were clammy. I kept wringing them behind my back as I stared at the curtain separating me from the audience. The hum of conversation, the murmur of tech buzzwords, and the occasional burst of laughter leaked through. 5 minutes, someone whispered in my ear. I nodded, my mouth dry. I took a breath. Then another. Then a third. I closed my eyes and pictured that steakhouse. Dad's voice. You're just a burden we carried until you finally left. And then, I opened my eyes. Stepped forward. The lights hit me like a wave of heat. Applause started, not explosive, but polite. I took the podium. Then I scanned the crowd. Row 5. Slightly to the right. And there he was. Dad. Sitting stiff, arms crossed. Brows furrowed. Like he wasn't sure he'd seen a ghost or made a mistake. My heart didn't skip. It didn't flutter. It surged. Guess whose face popped up in the crowd when I stepped onto that stage? He sat there, arms crossed tightly over his chest, expression unreadable, though I could tell exactly what he was thinking. The familiar crease in his brow, the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed faintly against his forearm, he was bracing for me to mess up. To crack under pressure. To stumble in front of a national audience so he could lean back and say, "Told you she wasn't cut out for this." But I didn't flinch. Not this time. As I stepped out onto that stage, every single step felt like a lifetime of pain unraveling. The lights were blinding at first, hot and harsh, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. A sea of faces stared back at me, some expectant, some distracted, some disinterested. But none of them mattered. Not really. Because I only saw him. Second row, just right of center. His face half-lit, eyes narrowed slightly, lips a tight line. I could see the slight rise of his shoulders as he breathed in, out. Silent. Still. Watching. Measuring. I swallowed the lump in my throat, reached the podium, and wrapped my fingers around its edges. My hands trembled at first, but I anchored them down, gripping the cool, metallic frame like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. I adjusted the microphone slowly, deliberately. The static crackled for half a second before quieting. The rustle in the audience stilled. Every breath in the auditorium seemed to wait. Then I began. "My name is Haley Taylor," I said, my voice even but soft. "And for most of my life, I was underestimated. There it was. The truth. Spoken into a mic echoing through speakers that wrapped around the room like arms. I was the girl who was told she was too emotional, I continued. The one whose ideas were laughed off, whose dreams were labeled unrealistic. I was the background noise in rooms full of louder voices, told to be grateful for the scraps of attention I was tossed. My heart thundered beneath my blouse. I glanced toward the second row again. He hadn't moved. No reaction. But I wasn't looking for a reaction. Not yet. I was giving him a mirror, and it was only a matter of time before he saw himself in it. I remember being told, more than once, that I wouldn't make it. That I wasn't built for the real world. That I'd end up broke, lost, forgettable. I let the words hang there, just long enough to sting. And I believed it. For a long time. A murmur swept the crowd, quiet but perceptible. Some leaned forward. Others nodded. They weren't just hearing me. They were feeling me. But something happened, I said, steady now. Something painful. Something necessary. I stopped trying to convince the wrong people of my worth. I took a breath. Let it settle. I stopped begging for seats at tables I'd never be welcome to, and I built my own. I could see it happening, expressions shifting across the room. Some eyes widening. Some brows furrowing. And still, his face didn't change. He sat there like stone. But I knew better. I knew him. The more still he looked on the outside, the more pressure he was feeling on the inside. I looked down for a beat, then back up. This time, my gaze landed squarely on him. And today, I said, each word pronounced with the clarity of a gavel strike, I lead a team of brilliant engineers at one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. There was a murmur again. This time, louder. A few claps from the back. I barely heard them. My eyes never left his. And I'm here, I added, my voice low, intimate, as if I was speaking only to him, because someone once told me I'd never amount to anything. He shifted slightly in his seat. It was barely noticeable, but to me, it was seismic. He uncrossed his arms. His fingers flexed. For a split second, he looked away. That was it. That was the moment he felt the sting of his own words, echoed back to him from a stage he never believed I'd stand on. I paused. The silence that followed was complete. You could hear every heartbeat. Every shallow breath. It was the kind of stillness that's less about quiet and more about gravity, when the weight of a truth pulls everyone down to earth. Then, without breaking my gaze, I slowly reached into my leather satchel, which sat beside the podium. I could feel a slight tremor in my fingertips. Not from fear. From power. I had never felt it like this before, not in my childhood bedroom, not at that steakhouse, not on graduation day when he looked through me like I was wallpaper. But here, now, I was commanding the room. I pulled out a crisp envelope. White. Thick paper. Heavy. I held it gently, letting the audience see it. Then I peeled it open, slow and intentional, and removed the check. I held it up, not boastfully, but with quiet defiance. This, I said, is a $10,000 donation to the Women in STEM Scholarship Fund. A gasp rippled through the front few rows. A camera flash flickered somewhere off to the side. Phones were lifted. I continued. Signed by me. From my first 2 months of work. I let that land. Let the words move through the air and wrap around every student, every investor, every journalist in the audience. I was told my degree was useless. That my ambition was laughable. that I was just a burden waiting to become someone else's responsibility. But today, this moment, is for every young woman who's ever been told she's too sensitive, too soft, too small to lead. I paused again and lowered the check. Then, without flinching, I turned my eyes to him one last time. He was staring at the envelope like it had burned his hands. His jaw twitched. His arms had dropped to his sides now, and he leaned forward slightly, as if he needed to see me better. Or maybe, for the first time. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a check. A donation to a women's STEM scholarship fund. Signed by me. $10,000. After the applause faded, after the cameras were turned off and the lights dimmed just slightly, I stepped down from that stage a different person than the one who had climbed onto it. My heels clicked softly on the polished floor, but the echo felt louder in my head, like a drumbeat leading me towards something long overdue. People tried to approach me, hands reaching for mine, smiles offered, congratulations whispered like confetti tossed into the air, but I didn't stop. Not yet. I gave polite nods, murmured thank yous, but my eyes were fixed ahead. He was still sitting in the second row. The room buzzed around us, conference chatter returning, chairs scraping, people lining up for coffee or catching the tail end of their breakout sessions. But the air between me and him? Still. Heavy. Like a thick fog had settled over just that one patch of carpet. Just him. Just me. As I walked toward him, everything else blurred. The chairs. The people. Even the air itself seemed muted, as if the universe knew this moment needed silence. Needed reverence. And then, I was in front of him. He stood slowly, like something in his body was working against him. His back, always straight and square and full of judgment, was hunched ever so slightly now. His eyes, the same ones that used to narrow every time I cried as a kid, were glistening in a way I had never seen before. He looked different. Smaller. Not in stature, but in presence. Like the layers of superiority and certainty he'd always worn had started to peel away. He looked like a man who had just realized the foundation he built his judgments on wasn't stone, but sand. And the tide had finally come in. His lips parted once, then closed again. His hand twitched at his side, like he wanted to reach out but didn't know how. He opened his mouth again, and this time, sound came out, but just barely. He began, voice hoarse. I didn't know. He blinked rapidly. Wetness lined his lashes, and then, one drop. Then another. And I knew. He wasn't just saying it. He was crying. He had never cried in front of me before. Not when Mom was sick. Not when I got into college. Not when I moved out. Not even when we'd fought, those messy, heartbreaking fights where words were thrown like knives. But now? After a few minutes of hearing who I'd become, after realizing what I had done with the very pain he gave me, now, he was unraveling. I didn't know you were doing all this, he whispered again, like repeating it might lessen the weight. I stood still, watching him closely. Watching the man who used to tower over me emotionally shrink down into something raw. Human. Fallible. I didn't rush to answer him. I didn't reach out to comfort him. Because I wasn't there to fix his pain. That wasn't mine to carry anymore. After a long pause, I finally said, quietly, I know you didn't. He looked at me, startled, as if expecting some grand declaration of forgiveness or relief. But I wasn't finished. I took a slow breath. Held it. Let it out. But I did it anyway. His face crumpled just slightly at that. A tiny wince, the kind that comes not from anger, but regret. He nodded, eyes cast down like they couldn't bear to hold mine. His shoulders slumped forward in a way I had never seen. Not from him. Not ever. And in that moment, I felt something strange. Not triumph. Not vindication. Not pity either. Peace. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need anything from him. Not a compliment. Not an apology. Not an "I'm proud of you." I had built something far more sacred than his praise, my own worth. It had taken years. Sleepless nights. Loneliness. Silence. But I had found it. And now that I had it, his opinion felt weightless. Like smoke trying to cling to glass. He swallowed hard. "I didn't realize how hard you were trying, how much you'd done." His voice cracked again. "I thought you'd end up stuck. Like you didn't know how to handle the real world." I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth or softness. It was steady. Measured. The kind of smile that comes after understanding the full truth and finally choosing not to be bitter about it. "I did end up stuck," I replied. "For a long time. Not because I couldn't handle the real world, but because I was too busy trying to prove my worth in yours." He winced again, his jaw tightening before he let his eyes meet mine one more time. "I never meant to hurt you." I tilted my head slightly. "But you did." He nodded. "I know." And again, I said nothing. Let it hang. Because not every wound needs words to close. Some just need acknowledgement. A long silence passed between us, and I could see his hands trembling. He didn't know what to do next. He was a man who had never been taught how to process remorse, only how to bury it under criticism and control. Finally, he cleared his throat, tried to straighten his posture again like it might help him regain some footing. You're incredible, Haley." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I didn't need him to say it. Not anymore. That realization hit me harder than any praise ever could. Because for most of my life, I had been starved for crumbs of his approval, watching every word, every facial expression, trying to earn just a little piece of his validation. But standing there, watching him fall apart beneath the weight of everything he never saw in me, I felt free. Totally, irrevocably free. And that made him cry harder than anything I could have said.